Long before modern paleontology first discovered the Brontotheres, the indigenous North American populations told tales of monster horses descending from the heavens to hunt buffalo. These so-called thunder horses, or thunder beasts, would gallop down with their enormous bulk, causing powerful storms, and occasionally falling in a hunt, leaving their remains to be uncovered by the tribespeople after the rains had passed. But this wasn't pure legend. They had the bones to back it up with. Bones of the Brontotheres. In this video, we're looking at the enormous horse relatives that provoked legends, and teasing apart fact from fiction. We'll look at how Brontotheres came to be, how they were discovered twice, and where they went. Let's start with some legendary tales. Thunder horses, or thunder beasts, are commonly spoken of by the western Sioux in the northern plains. Oral tradition in these parts passes on stories of a giant animal that lives in the sky, descending to earth to trample buffalo herds. The rumble of its powerful hooves caused the thunder to echo through the sky, and sparks flying up as it galloped across the rocks created the lightning. At the peak of the storm, this beast would fall to the ground and turn to stone, leaving only giant bones that once held it up. This idea seems far-fetched by modern meteorological standards, but the legends did come with some evidence. Giant femurs and jaws with huge teeth could be found uncovered by the rains after such a storm, and these were thought to be the remains of the thunder beasts from long ago. One such fossil was shown to the Yale scientist and counter-nutcase of Edward Drinker Cope, Nathaniel Charles Marsh, in 1870, when he went to investigate rumors of such bones found in the region. Joseph Leidy had gotten there first, and he had already described the fossils by 1848, but it was Marsh and his crew that took the early leaps to giving them a name. Soon after arriving, Marsh uncovered a complete skeleton, 2.5 meters tall, 10 meters long, and sporting a massive double-pronged horn on the front of its face. The legend of the thunder beasts was coming to life. Marsh identified the family Brontotheriidae and placed them among the odd-toed ungulates in the Perissodactyla order. This is where horses, tapirs, and rhinos sit, and the Brontotheres certainly look like the latter, with hefty bodies and long facial structures. Since their discovery in the Badlands of South Dakota, Brontotheres fossils have been identified in Asia, Europe, and Canada as well. They were originally thought to be closely related to horses, but more recent phylogenetic assessments have placed them outside of the clade of modern perissodactyls entirely. Their true position on the tree of life isn't yet settled, but while they looked more like rhinos than any other ungulates around today, it's likely they weren't that closely related to modern rhinos. Setting aside their exact phylogenetic history, let's look at what made them outstanding. Their huge mass. The Eocene was the second of three epochs of the Paleogene, the period that came after the dinosaurs. It had been a long and interesting recovery from the end Cretaceous event, during which mammals would explode into niches that were previously all held by giant reptiles. And with this expansion of species came the expansion of waistlines, and by the Eocene the first groups of colossal mammals were exploring new scales. Thunderbeasts were some of the earliest of these groups, growing to enormous sizes, with the largest of them being close in size to the African bush elephant, the third largest terrestrial mammal alive today. Another awesome name for this group is Titanotheres, and that's pretty apt because they were thought to have weighed more than 4 tons. Earlier Brontotheres didn't have the characteristic horns that we associate with them and their rhino doppelgangers, but these came with time, and their most common depiction, Megacerops coloradensis, was also the largest known so far, with a pair of blunt, almost paddle-shaped horns on its face. There are some other things that make these monsters stand out from rhinos too, including the fact that it had 4 toes on its front feet, which goes against everything that the odd-toed ungulates stood for. The horns, too, were unlike those of a rhino, being made of bone instead of keratin. The purpose for these strange horns isn't fully understood, but they appear to be larger in males than females. This suggests pressure from sexual selection, and also that males would perhaps use them against one another during mating. It was first assumed that the Brontothere horns would have been used for headbutting between rivals, similar to what we see in rams, but on closer inspection they showed to be too weak for collisions like this. Instead, they might have been used for interlocking and engaging in shoving matches similar to what we see in large deer species like Cervus elaphus. They could also have been swung at one another like clubs, digging to the body of rivals like a gut punch, or used as levers to topple one another over in combat. But it wasn't just other Brontotheres that these animals would have to worry about in Eocene North America. Thunderbeasts perhaps didn't get big by mistake. Their intimidating size, head-mounted weaponry, and thick skin may have come also as a response to predation as well as sexual competition. While very little could have taken on an adult Megacerops directly, their juveniles would have been vulnerable to the brutishly forceful hyenodon, and perhaps by some of the faster but somehow lighter Mesonychians. It's likely not predators that spelled the end of the thunderbeasts, but perhaps aptly a change in weather patterns. And we're about to touch on that, but it's time for the traditional moment of gratitude. We really appreciate you taking the time to watch our videos, and if you've enjoyed this one, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and check out some of our others. And if there's anything else you'd like us to cover, let us know in the comments. Alright, so thunder beasts had thick, wide teeth, adapted for softer vegetation. And towards the end of the Eocene, the landscapes were shifting from hot, lush, and wet to drier ecosystems more associated with the Oligocene. This brought with it hardier plants, tougher foliage, and it's possible that horse ancestors like Mesohippus were far better at taking advantage of the shift in food than the Brontotheres. This is one angle to look at the question of why Brontotheres and its kin disappeared, but to understand better it might be useful to look at why they got to where they did in the first place. As we mentioned, large mammals exploded onto the scene sometime after the dust settled from the dinosaur extinction. And during the Eocene, they did it so remarkably fast, experiencing orders of magnitudes of increases in size. It has been put forward that this is a general trend in evolution. This is the essence of Cope's rule, which suggests that larger animals simply outcompete smaller ones. And if we look back at the Cretaceous fauna before them, for example, there's a lot that would instinctively support this. But it might not be the case, at least with Brontotheres. A fairly recent paper from 2023 places this growth strongly in the hands of competition with other herbivores, but more specifically, the lack of it. It could well have been in that the first giant mammals to exist did so simply because they could, not because they needed to. And since Brontotheres were some of the first to do it, they may have been some of the most vulnerable in the face of later competition. Essentially, these enormous thunderbeasts were gifted a sandbox environment with very little to direct their evolution. As competition increased in some niches, some lineages would die out, and the ones that escaped would move into less congested sandboxes. And as with anybody who spends too much time in a sandbox, they got very large. But while they were doing this, there would have been a growing competition filling all of those previous niches, and eventually there would be no more sandboxes to migrate into. Thunderbeasts may simply have run out of room. Whatever the cause, thunderbeasts ended their shift around 34 million years ago at the end of the Eocene. And there they'd stay, slowly turning to stone in the mud, until a band of naked apes entered their turf around 20,000 years ago and started digging up their remains. The human legends of the thunderbeasts may not have been entirely accurate, but there's no question that these early giants were a powerful force of nature for a very long time. But they weren't alone. As Brontotheres died out and the Oligocene progressed, the reign of the hell pigs began. And if that sounds interesting, check out our video on Daeodon for more information about that. Meanwhile, that's all for this one. We hope you liked it, and we'll see you next time.